end of Baba Basra, didn't have Orev. Lakach Bigdoi ki Orev Zar Imaraptale Re'echa, etc. These are different sukkim found over there in Kufay and Gimel Amid Beis. Ukmoshu Skala Mala, Ukshem Sheba Orev, Al Smach Arvusai Ilva. The idea of Orev is because Al Smach Arvusai, that's why he gave the money. It was Adaita the Hachi. Adaita the Hachi, you need the das of the Malva, which this is the reason, this creates the Shibud of the Orev. Al Smach Arvusai Ilva, Kach Zeh, Al Smach Nechosov, Al Smach Nechosov. That creates a din. So we clearly see that the Agdara of Shibud is that the das of the Malva creates the Shibud of Orev. The Meiri is not in the habit of writing poetry. He says, "What's a din deraisa?" And just like by Orev, the dynamic is set by one thing, by the dots of the Malva. Who I didn't know. That's why that together. Al das. This is also al das. Umagil bepumayu de inshi nichsid by inish naravim. But he quotes a lashon of the Gemara in B'charis B'mches, which is a Magil bepumi regular quote found in people say. He said this is actually true. You can't say just because there's an Orev of a person, there's also an Orev of Nechasim. So the question in Machlekes of Shibud Deraisa, Lav Deraisa is simply to what extent do we extend the idea of Orev also to Nechasim? Now he's going stomach the milsa of Shibud Deraisa, okay? This is the Ma'aseh of the Meiri. So this is the Mamish the Ramah, but it's much clearer here, adding the point of Das. Now, once you say this, I want to read you a Rashi in Gittin, which says the same thing. That Rashi, talking about the memra of Rav Nachman in Gittin Nun Amid Aleph, what does he says? He says the same thing as the Meiri. Dr. Rashi writes on the halacha of Rav Nachman says the din, just find it for you here. Shtar chayv hayotzal yisayimim. Afal pisha kosev v'shvach ein negoy ve'elim naziburis. Shtar chayv sheyotzal yisayimim, he's only gave ziburis. So the Gemara continues and says, Omar Rav, the Gemara says like this. Kivan the dina midaraisa be'idis, afila miyas menami be'idis. If the din deraisa it is, for example, in case of Nezikin, then even from Yisayim you get from Idis. Zogt Rashi. The Ramasl Kivan the din deraisa be'idis sharei shibdaloi v'nasakak kazu orev lamalva. Sharei shibdaloi. Now we're going on tzad the Shibud deraisa. Kimavur b'taisvus. Okay, so should you understand Shibud deraisa? It's shibdaloi. It also needs to have the Kleich Shibud of the Leiva. Interesting. He's Meshabed. You need the Leiva also to be Meshabed. So Shibda Loi is not just in the case of Shibda Beferish. You're not making an Ukimta. We're talking about Midiraisa Be'idis. We're talking Karkos. You don't need a Shibda Beferish for this. And Rashi used the Lashon of Shibda Loi because that's what Shibudim are. It's found in the Das, the Malva, and the Leiva. The Iri points out the Malva. This points out the Leiva. Shibdalai v'nasakakazu orev la malva. What's he doing? He made his karka an orev to the malva. And this is called Shibud deraisa. V'orev mishtabed min atayra dichsiv anoichi ervenu etc. And he brings the same pasuk of orev equals he's quoted as mamish the meiri. So if you want to know what Shitas Rashi is on Shibud deraisa, two things to point out. First of all, it's a function of the das of the life and the malva. B, it's a getter of Orev. Tosef versteht on the tzad the Shibud deraisa. It's interesting to know that in other words, lich oira, this does not fit with Ula and Rabbah the way the Rashbam explains it in Bava Basra. I want to point that out. Okay. Now the question only is, this may be the interpretation of Rashi and Psachim Daf Glemet Amid Beis. Divra Masal Bal Chayv. When he writes the Lashon over there, the Baal Chayv Lemafreya or Kana Lahaba, so Rashi writes the Shibud Loi Nechasa. And we thought this may be an idea of Shibud Beferish, but the fact of the matter is, in light of the Rashi and Gittin, I have no hechrich to say that. Shibud loy is simply the word used to explain that the shibud is chal, because everything is shibud is chal, with the dots of the loiv and the malva. That's the Rashi in Gittin. We have no reason there to discuss shibud beferish. So this is what's happened there for that diuk in the Rashi in Psachim Lamed and Beis. It's not mukhrach anymore. I'm going to say it clearly. I can't be machriach that at all, because once it's parallel to the lashon of Rashi and Gittin the Number Aleph, which is basically it's a function of the das and the Torah Yodel Shav Daita Shabdei Adam that Daita Doch he made the alva, and that's why he's mishabed it there. It's all a function that this fits with the shita of the Rashba. The Rashba also writes that even if Shibud de rice, it's not on metaltalin because people are not soymech on metaltalin. Therefore, I just want to point out, so that Shibdul I found in Lamed Amud Bezim Sachim that we quoted the Pnei Yeshua is not mukhrach. That's what I wanted to say. What we do have is something interesting, because here in the Sugya of Baal Chav L'Mafrei L'Kan Lahaba, Rashi mentioned that a Shibud is something which you can't sell. In other words, it's not mafkiya b'chlal the Shibud. So l'chara, what is it? It's a kiyin in the nechasim proper. Okay, and yet here he calls it medin orev. He doesn't mention mashkoin here in Gittin. He mentions medin orev. This becomes interesting. This becomes interesting because l'chayre, it's not the orev b'shas matan mos, as we explained the getter of orev b'shas matan mos. At the best, it's going to be orev b'shas gvia or shachar matan mos. And the question is, if that's the case, why would that be a reason for it cannot be mufka with the with mechira? This is something we have to discuss. It could be that guf is part of the getter of the das. That is the tzur of the arvus. It's not mufka. We have to think about that. I'm pointing out it's not black and white. That's what I wanted to add. That's a very important nekuda. There you have it. I was also asked a question. I just want to clarify this before I go into Divrei Agada. As you know, my soul lies more in the halachic part of our Torah, and that is, as we know, the Rishonim write that the Chassidus write that the Neshama is in the Seichel. Leiv is the Nefesh HaBahamis. So I try my best to be Anshe HaSeichel. Okay, so we have to understand that what was I just going to do? I just lost the thread of thought. Yes, I was asked. When I explained yesterday, Das Rav Nachman, is that Lemaskana? Is that only according to the Havamina? What's it about? This is a question which David asked me. He sent me a mail. I just didn't have time to answer it, so I'll answer it now. It goes like this. It seems to be very clear. Let's start with A. The idea of Rav Nachman's idea of Gavo Mars Yeshlai, and that the idea is that there's that Ishtar is a mashka, and obviously he doesn't hold so lemaskana, because we know he passes to Yudam Shmuel. There's nothing more than shvach. Obviously, the maskana he holds like the maskana of the Rashba, that the shtar is mili, and therefore, since it's only mili bi'alma, it does not that the value of the shtar is the value of the chayv at the time of gvia. Therefore, it's not a mashka. It's as simple as that. That's as far as that's concerned. So that would be agreed upon. Everyone's going to agree lemaskana that Rav Nachman will not be that lemaskana. As is supposed to get of shibudim, yes, you're going to have to say that in Rav Nachman, because there's no reason to think that Rav Nachman reversed or saw an idea of shibudim in Nardah and then doesn't agree with it. There's no reason to say that. Why would he see it lechatchila? So obviously Rav Nachman's approach is that the shibud is something which is mufka with mechira equals. It's like Rabbeinu Gershon, and the din of lekuchas is the halach of orev, as we mentioned before. And that's not lemafreya, which is very good. Rav Nachman Taka holds it's not lemafreya. I lechera the Rav Nachman holds Yisayim Shegov Uchev V'Cheskes Aviyim Belchev Government. The Rashbam already answered the question based on the Gemara in Psachim. That's a din of Shibuda de Rab Nasan. There's nothing to do with the mafreya who gaiver or not. That you can see the Rashbam at the end of Kuf Chaf Hey Amid Aleph. So yes, Rav Nachman definitely believed that Shibuda de Rais is a getter of Eved Leiva plus Oret. Rabba on the other hand, since he believed that Shibud de Chasim is something which is lemafreya, etc. Shibud de Chasim is lemafreya, at least in Das Nardah. In Das Nardah, he definitely thinks it's a key in by for the kaka itself. Elamai, how come he paskins the halachim ikana lahabu gaiva? That's how Rabba paskins over there. What will be the din over there? First of all, this is Rabba, but let's just keep the Rabba himself. I'm going to say it again. Holds that Shibud Deraisa is the way we always understood it, based on the sugya and Kuf Ayin Hem, based with the Rashba. There it's a halacha of a kinyan beguf karka, and therefore hypothetically it would be a mukzik. Why isn't it a mukzik at the end of the halacha? The answer is not a mukzik because at the end of the day, it's only a bilus, so to speak, for the moment is found in the karka. You don't have the gufa karka itself, and that the shvur found of the kanal habu of Rava. Yochalas al kebezuzah. Here will be explained like the Ravan by Mechiras Shtaris, that since at the end of the day, the realization of your ownership in the karka depends whether the loiva will pay or won't pay. Therefore, at the end of the day, you don't have Bailus Gemura. And that Shibud thus is not a Bailus Gemura. And he believes, like Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, that since it's not a Bailus Gemura, it's only a Bailus dependent on the Ratzon of the loiva to pay, to be Masalik or not, to be Meroikain or not Meroikain. You know, if you will pay or won't pay, not didn't say siluk, it'll be merayken. That is also just like that's a chesron and gufa bilis, and just like moichel shtar chayv lechaveiroi, you can still be moichel. The same thing here. This is not a bilis chaluta. That's the getter of yachal salkoi, like found in psachel amedalf, and that's why it's not mukslik. So I'm just saying it's very simple. There is a ongoing machlekes of Rav Nachman versus Rabbah. What is the makar and the getter of shibud deraisa? All this according to the Rashba. The only difference is that Narda, at least the character of Nachman, believed there's a din of shtar is not just mili, it's a mashkan. That at the end he doesn't agree with because he passes not like Narda. Rabba thinks in Narda that shibudim are something which since you're not misalik, you're only Moroccan, you are called a mukzik, which is as the Rashbam himself writes that at the end of Kuf Kafei Amid Aleph. Obviously, La'alachi doesn't pass in that way because he believes it's still not called a mukzik, although you're not misalik, you're only Meroikain, as we pointed out, Afal Pikain. There's a swerve Yachal Salkei found in the Ravon, as we mentioned, since the realization of your ownership is totally what the leiva will do. It's not called a Bailus Gemura. And that's not enough for calling mukzik, therefore it's only called Shvach. That's what's left. So there's two things which have changed, but the basic idea of the machlek is that what shibudim are still stays Rav Nachman and Rav. I repeat again, and Rav Nachman holds the mafreya that we know that's no raya at all because that's because the shibud is Rav Nassim. There's one more point I'm just going to point out. I hope you understood what it is. I'm going to read one piece of Rashbam, and tomorrow I will explain it. But I want you to, if you have your Bobas with you for a moment, I just want to put one little piece in Rashbam, which is like a thorn in the side. And I'm surprised no one called me to ask Pshat. The lashon of the Rashbam is the last words of Divra Maschil, V'oid ha'omar mar. That's in Kuf Chafei Amid Aleph. After he brings the kasha of Abaya on Abaya, that he asked the kasha from Yisrael Mishigovu, etc., he writes, V'im lo yemuzah biyad avim b'chaim ein yachol ba'al achiv d'gvaisai v'alo ilu kanai hayisayim acham yisas avim karka mi yachol d'gvaisai v'al mishta shlem eshanin b'bchayre shein ha'isha neitel subasa b'roi u'ba'al choy v'kiyotziba. And then he adds words. U'metaltele d'yasma le mishtadl ba'al choy. Kach kasuv b'pirish Rabbeinu Chananel. The words metaltele d'yasma mishtadl ba'al choy don't fit. What does it mean? We're not talking about metaltal diyasma here. That makes sense in kind. The Gemara in Psach and Lamed Aleph mentions that as a part of a memory of Rami Bar Chama, totally with another context. What's it doing here? Those words, I need someone to sit down, read, and explain to me. Okay? Anybody that can offer something intelligent, please send me a mail or a text tonight. Metaltal diyasma mishtadl b'chayv. Maza osepo. What metaltal are we talking about? That he's talking about. This is a question which I was waiting for answer a question which obviously did not come. Good. There. I use pointed nafshi mishtachas. Now we'll do the agoda. Okay. So we're learning the gedorim of Tefillah. Last week, we 2 weeks ago we discussed the idea of what we do when we're davening. We're asking for shinuyim mishmei moray. Last week we discussed the idea of what does it mean, the covered shemaim thrown through the pulos of Bnei Adam, which therefore keeps the muzzin of the neshama in the guf. I quoted the mimer of the Sheg Yisharim. We elaborate on that at length. Today I'd like to take it to a step a little further, and that is as follows. I want to discuss that which Reb Chaim Volozhin talks about Chava, the idea of bracha. also found in the chinuch. But if you have the sheets that Meir set up for last week, which were not used, there's a Derech Hashem here and a Rabbeinu Chaya and a Ramban, which I want to learn together. So if you can get a hold of them, that would be great. Unless Meir, can you send it again now? Meir, can you send it again?
Sure.
That would probably be helpful. Tell me if you sent it. Right.
Rabbi, just to clarify, was Rabbi explaining?
Talking to me. I don't know who's talking to me. Who's talking to me?
I didn't understand the way Rabbi explained. Rabbi explained Rav Nachman according to.
David, who's talking to me now? I don't see.
Yeah.
David. Okay. Yeah. Hi.
Is Rabbi explaining?
Your picture is frozen. That means you have a bad internet connection.
Very bad. Yeah, it's very bad.
Okay.
Here.
So where are you? You're in the
No,
yeshiva. You don't have an internet connection.
No, like there's no really place to be. So.
There's no place to be. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want to say?
Rabbi's explaining according to the fact that Rav Nachman's explaining Das Shulchan Mitam, or the Havana that Rav Nachman's going.
I'm not hearing well. I am explaining Rav Nachman, the Maskana. What is Rav Nachman's Shita and Shibura Deiraisa? As far as that's concerned, that stays. The only shaila is that called Muzika Roy?
No, Rashbam seemed to say that.
I wish I could hear you, but you're breaking up.
Okay.
You know what? Try calling a regular phone line after this, okay? Because at the moment you're breaking up for me. You okay?
Okay.
It's about an important conversation.
Yeah.
Just we got to get you to better internet. Is it better where you are, Shai?
Abby?
It's pretty good here.
So why is he here where you are? Bring him to you.
Ravi.
Cedric.
Does he hear me now?
Cedric.
No. Maybe just leave.
Oh, here you are, David. You moved.
Yeah.
Now I see you.
Okay.
Yes, excellent question. Okay, let's make it fast.
Rabbi's explaining according to the fact that the Rav Nachman's explaining the Shulchan Mitam.
Shulchan Mitam. Oh, Mitam. It means Mihasam.
Mitam, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm saying, what am I saying? Rav Nachman would not concoct second interpretation in our Dor unless there's either a hechrich in our Dor to say that's the Pshat and Shibur Deraisa, or the Pshat, that's how he's typhus bichlal. Since there's no hechrich in our Dor to say it, so al kochich, it means to say, well, you know, our Dor didn't say what you're going.
Doesn't the Rashbam say that it's going to, he says that, the Rav Nachman just want to make a seer between the two of them.
You don't see, I don't know what you want. I'm saying it again. All Rav Nachman said, that Shulchan Mitam says that you're goiva, period. Now Rav Nachman comes and says, you're not goiva everything. There is a machlokes. It's a machlokes amiroim. When he's stira, machlokes in Shmuel and Nardot. Very simple.
Right.
So now what do you want? Rav Nachman is explaining the Nardot. That's all.
Right. So Rashbam says he's explaining because he doesn't want, there's a steer between the story of Safta and
I don't hear you. We're steering
between the story of Safta and Kufchaf Hem and Beis and the Arda and Kufchaf Dam and Beis.
All that I repeat. The Rashbam doesn't bring up Rav Nachman. There's Safta. There's no reason to discuss it.
He seems to be explaining on that Kufchaf Hem and Aleph.
It doesn't even. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, with greatest respect, I'm going to say it again. There's no reason to concoct that type of convoluted Shibura Deraisa unless you hold that way Lamaisa.
Yeah, he doesn't hold it anything like that. He just thinks the Shulchan don't have to hold that because he doesn't want to make a steer between. He thinks there's no
I'm sorry. I suggest you think carefully what I said. If you want, call me up later. I want to teach something. That's if that's your argument, I'm sleeping well. Bye. Take care. David, my brain doesn't work without your coffee. Okay, let's go here. So basically, we learned a concept that the Kadosh Baruch Hu somehow only acts, only gives when man recognizes him. That's what we pointed out in the pasuk in the very beginning. Shirish, the first place of tefillah was by kshamim, when we saw that there has to be adam shemakim b'teivasan shel kshamim umevakesh aleim, and without that the rain will not come. So let's just try to understand first of all what this is. Now we understand it means that now we did learn that kshamim is changing then things all up b'shmei shamayim, whatever it's ribui chachma, whatever and chesed, whatever it be. These things are up to man. I'd like to try to understand this. What is this unbelievable responsibility that we have with bracha and tefillah? And it's unbelievable schus. Now, what is the schus? What's going to go back to old things which have to be explained. And that's the first page that Meir sent us is the famous Derech Hashem in Chelik Aleph, Perik Beis the Akdama. So I just want to read a few pieces here just to understand. The ultimate goal of creation is for God to do good from his goodness to the other. God himself, he is the ultimate perfection. It's not that he has everything. He by being infinite, by definition, there's no lacking. Okay, the definition of infinity means everything is perfect. So it's a synonymous. That's all this is. Obviously so, because any other shlemut is a relative shlemut compared to something else. You say you are whole compared to something fragmented, but if you're talking infinity, you talk of a reality where there is no fragmentation. So it's not a relative. In a fragmented world, this happens to be whole. That's very nice. Okay, there's an option of it not being whole, and this is whole. That's called a relative reality. But by God, in essence, there is no relativity. Was he's perfect compared to the world? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about God prior to the world. He's by definition infinite. Ultimately, he is pure oneness and pure perfection. It's all saying he's pure oneness, he's pure perfection because he's infinite. Thus, when we talk about anything else which is perfected, we understand it's not absolute perfection. It's a relative perfection. I mean, not amitis doesn't mean it's not a lie. It's not absolute perfection. It's relative perfection. Underline the word amitis and understand it means absolute. And I do not mean the vodka. I mean with an E at the end. Absolute perfection. Okay, elati karish shlemus be'erech. You see, it would be called relative perfection. El compared to something which is not as perfect as it is. These are the words that he says, which are excellent. But the ultimate would be the absolute, the word shlemus. What it really means when we talk about the absolute shlemus, which is only God himself. Valkain, and because that is true, since it was his will to do good to outside of himself, obviously if he's absolute perfection, therefore he only deals in absolute forms. So obviously the absolute perfection can only express itself in absolute giving. Now, once again, this is a little play over here, because in reality, you're never going to have absolute good. You can only have relative good because if you're dealing with a finite form and you're only giving it the most it can have, that's already a finite form of absolute goodness. So actually, the logic behind this argument is a bit faulty. Should I explain this, or this is obvious to anybody that reads? I probably have to explain this. Okay. If an absolute entity wants to give to a finite form, now the finite form by definition does not have vessels to receive more than what finite can receive. So it is not absolute goodness, it is only relative goodness, relative to its capability of reception. For example, I really want to teach you guys, but it depends on the internet. Or it depends on the gray cells between your ears, or it depends on your maturity, or it depends on how much you're well prepared, right? I can only teach you as much as you have a clay kibble. Same thing here. So at the end of it, I want to give my total self. But at the end of the clay kibble to receive what I'm saying depends on your hachana, on your amelus v'yigia, on the internet, whether the Wi-Fi is good or not, etc., etc., etc. By the bare fact that this is an honest, true panim bepanim, it's already a limitation. So it depends on the caliph. So am I really giving you the total self? Or you could say, I would love to. I am giving myself, but you're not receiving it. So is that what he's saying here? That God is giving his absolute self, but it's actually a relative receiving. Well, if that's the case, for goodness sake, so you're not giving your total self. Because at the end of the day, there's something which is not being given. You can't give without receiving. So notice the logic here is a bit faulty. It's not as if God must, if he's perfect and he has to express his perfection, he has to give the most that the recipient can receive. That's an oxymoron. Once it's the most that the recipient receives, equals it is not the total giving of the self, by definition. For me to a moment, I remember when I used to learn Reb Zistel, he used to say like one sentence, and since I knew him so well, I knew what he meant. He didn't have to talk. But if I would actually have to sit there and they'd explain everything to me, we would have stayed stuck in one blatt gemara for 3 weeks like we do. Okay, there's no way, but not bending shas. So you understand this is how it works. So everything is totally in the makabel. So if that's the case, I'm going to say again, this isn't accurate. I would say he wants to give the most he can give, not that he's really expressing the ultimate self of the man. That would be a non-logical argument. This should be rewritten, and that's why I'm doing this on a purpose, because I know people read this as if it's the Tanakh. I was going to say the gospel, but that would be a joke. As if this is the Tanakh and this is Mipiak Ver Shamanu. No, we have to understand this is a philosophical argument which is somewhat faulty and has to be rewritten or understood in a certain way. It must be understood that since God is the ultimate perfection, he wants to give the most which the recipient can have. And therefore, he will create realities in the recipient to let it have the most possible. Now, that's really something interesting. That's what he says over here. Now, I'll say this, Bob. That's a very important nakuda. Because he wants to give, he will create a reality which will receive the most it can receive. It will give it vessels which it can attain. Therefore, not only does he give, he also creates the vessels. What did he do? He wants to express his total giving, and therefore he will create a rich, wretched world in which he will give it the vessels of being a recipient of the total giving. Now, if you think of it, it's really very interesting. I really want to be about tzedakah, so I will create poor people and give them the capability of walking around like this, and then I have to put money in their pockets. That doesn't sound too good to me. And the answer is yes, I do not want to give money. I want to give stature to people. I don't want them to walk around like this. I want them to have the capability of earning a living and then therefore receiving this because they reach out of their developed stature. And what I've created is a person which found the ultimate stature, which ultimately gives him the grace of God or a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, the idea of walking around like this is not what God wants. So what he's done is create imperfect beings with the capability of self-perfection, which that self-perfection in the highest level will give him the highest possibility of good, which is Dveikus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what he writes. So it's really something very special. I say this because many people quote this Ramchal. You can read it further where he writes that the reason God created the world, ki teva hatoiv lehitiv, is the nature of good to want to give. And that's why he created the world. That is actually heretical if it's read in a non-intelligent way. A teva means to say you have a nature which compels you. That's what nature means. You have a certain compelling characteristic. For example, if you had whatever childhood you had, there's many arguments in the courts. Don't blame this murderer. He grew up, I don't know where, or so and so forth. There are many deterministic schools in the world of psychology. So is God also deterministic? He's never stuck. He's good. He's got to behave good. Reminded that little girl from SAR that I told you. God has to be good. If not, why is he God? He does not be anything. He's infinite. It's not. I don't think it's even not precautions because it's stipulations. To say the word has to or has a nature is really pathetic. So what does the Ramchal mean when he says these things? Once again, I'm not his lawyer, but what does it mean? I'm sure he was not cursed, and he was a chacham atzum. He's one of the most profoundest logical thinkers I've read. Really, if you knew his literature, he has a whole book on logic, just on logic, literally a book on logic. analysis of logic. The guy's frightening. So anyway, what does the man mean in context of his writings? It simply means that God, for whatever reason be, we do not know, chose to create a world. Within that, he created a certain, so to speak, characteristics of himself. Infinity is not good or bad, it's infinite. But infinity has no definition. So how can you possibly say infinite gevura, infinite chesed? You idiot! If it's infinity, it can't be defined as chesed. Chesed is already a finite form. So when you meant infinite chesed, you mean a finite form which we have no comprehension of its limitations. You don't really mean infinity. At the best, you think of the infinity of numbers, not the infinity as the Ein Sof, as we call it. So when you say Chesed She'ein Lo Sof, what do you really mean? It means to say it's beyond any Sof that we know, but it had a Aschala. You know what the Aschala was? The Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to create a form called Chesed. Infinity means it has no beginning, it has no end. This, at the best we can say, has no end, but it has a beginning. It was the Ratzon, the infinite Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create a Kli called Chesed, a Kli called Gvura, a Kli called Tiferes, Chochma, Bina, Das. These are all Ritzonos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create finite forms, so to speak. Finite means it has a beginning, okay? There's a beginning at one point of time, whatever it only be, I can't even use the word time, when God wanted to be a Bayrei, and therefore he wanted to be an Chochma, Bina, V'das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Yesod, Malchus. It is not inherent in God, because if God inherently has Sephiros, then he is not infinite. These are all the kavanas you have when you say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You can never say that God is inherently A, B, C, or D. By putting inherent categorizations in infinity, you just undermine the concept of infinity. Infinity means he, and no beginning, no end, no form. As soon as you put in a characteristic, you're creating a form, a hagdara. It has a beginning, it has an end. That's not infinity. That's a kli in which infinity can be expressed, but it's a kli. It's a very large kli. It's what you call Ein Sof, but it's not the Ein Sof of Atzmusa Yizborach. The essential God, when we say Ein Sof of God, we're talking about no beginning, no end. Who ayav, who yeh, b'sifara. You know what I mean? Beli reshit, beli tachlit. Literally, you say that, right? Beli reshit, beli reshis, beli tachlis, right? You have to excuse me one minute. אני בשיעור עכשיו, שלום. Yes, we're good. Okay, you say that b'li reishis b'li sachlis v'lo yo'ez v'amisra. What are you saying? No beginning, no end, and yet he's a powerful oiz, misra. Those are finite forms. What you're saying that these things are not the essential inherent self; they're expressions which he created. One has to remember to say that. We don't, as the Rambam points out in Nevuchim, we never say God is Rachum. We don't say God is Chanun. We say God is Nikra Rachum. God is Nikra Chanun. He is called. What do you mean it's called? He created these names on his own. Locha Hashem Agdula V'Agvura means the Nevi'im understood his Anaga. I can say, you as a finite form said you're a nice guy. I cannot say God is anything. I can only say God expresses himself in different ways of behavior. I have no idea what the word is mean in context of God. I taught you multitudes of times, the word is a word describing a phenomenon within time and space. I am a phenomenon within time and space, which is the moment writing notes. Okay? That's what you would write. I am writing notes. I am equals I am a phenomenon in time and space, which is expressing itself by writing notes or to whatever else I'm doing, okay? That is called is, that's called are, those are those words. As I told you many times, Hebrew doesn't even have that, which is interesting. You know, the Israelis like saying he eating, he sleeping, he walking, he talking. They don't use the word is because it doesn't exist in Hebrew, okay? But that's what the word is means. To say that God is actually not true. Write this down. RB says God is not. He expresses himself in this in Chanun, in Rachum. He's Nikar Ranun. He's Nikar Chanun. He not is Rachum v'Chanun. The Lashon the Rambam Mefurish in Moreh Nevuchim, when he writes this, he writes that we call God Rachum, not defining him, but telling how he's Noyeg. When you say Yud Gimel Rachum, you're not defining him. You're talking about his Hanhaga. That's what you're talking about. So one has to chop that. So when they say, so God created an Hanhaga called Chesed, why? Because he wanted that, and that Hanhaga of Chesed has a nature to it. The Hanhaga of Chesed has a certain Hagdara. I want to act as Chesed. That Chesed is Mushlam, etc. And that's what we're talking about over here. We're not talking that God is a Teva. No, the sphere of Chesed has a Teva. That's true. God created a finite form which has certain natures to it. And the infinite expresses itself in those forms. That's all this really is. I want you to understand. Just as I express myself in multiple forms, I'm a teacher, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I don't know, I'm a son, I'm a neighbor, I don't know, Baruch Hashem, still a chavrusa, you know what I mean? A lot of different forms. You see me when I'm nice. When I'm a chavrusa, you should see me. It makes the Rottweilers look like puppies. You know what I mean? And I'm a Mekayim Behider is Vahev Vasufa. You know what I mean? So there's different types of forms. With my grandchildren, I'm like Bozo the clown. You know what I mean? Even say stupid things. Would you believe it? Because that's the way it is. You do according to the Makabla. That's the Agdori here. So now let's understand, what is this type that God wants? God wants you to have the ultimate type possible. What is the ultimate type possible God can give to a Nivra? Well, since the essence of a Nivra, I'm going to do this by pen now because I want to explain, is basically the capability of Havana V'Askala. This is something we have to get into our minds, never. The best we can give to a person is Chachma. Because the essential Kli that you have, which expresses the closest to your essential self, is you're capable of comprehension. Comprehension of what? Comprehension of your Bayrei. The biggest tainug is a person which really understands, as the old language is, Ein Simcha Ka'ataras HaSveikos. There's no greater pleasure for the person who lives in Chachma to finally have a clear Hagdara. I know you like, if you ever crack a sugya on your own, when you finally come to a formulation, it may take you. I was just working. I had already tshuva la'alocha on the minyanim of the porches they're doing over here. They've sent me tons of tshuvas of Rabbi this, Rabbi that. You know, when I finally decided to crack it on my own, and I came out whatever I came out with, which it's not negate to you. Otherwise, I would send it to you. I don't think it's negate to any of you because don't have porches. You live so far from each other, you could never minion if you wanted to. Okay? And you guys in Keren B'Yavne, you have a proper minion. So we're not talking about that. But we have this issue, and whatever it be, it was a Gan Eden when I finally cracked it the way I think the truth is, and I suddenly realized I'm a Ben Yochid here, and I felt like Robinson Crusoe. I was very happy. Ein Simcha Ka'ataras HaSveikos, you know. I finally found out what I thought was the truth, which is very important. It's an unbelievable tainuk. Without the tainuk of the neshamas should be Gan Eden, when their toifus v'avonis v'asaga, as much as they find it can understand what Ein Sof really means. Now, if you really lived your life saying Kriyash Rabbi Kavana, your biggest goal would be, what does the word Echad really mean? We already know it doesn't mean you don't have an extended family on the Olympus. So Echad means to say pure oneness. What does that mean? Mishashti b'chol kela. I've spent a lot of years working on this, and there's a lot of literature, and there's a library full of ideas. But at the end of the day, you don't know. You know what you don't know. You know the scope of what's in there, but you don't have a definition. Like that. You have a lot of information, but you can't, okay, you know. One would say, I know of it, I don't know its essence. I don't know the essence of it. I know it sounds like, I know information which will sound like celestial plumbing. And I can become a PhD in celestial plumbing. No, this hits that, and that hits that. That at the end, it doesn't tell me the essence of what this really is. And do you realize that when I get to that one day and know that, I'm going to get drunk from pleasure. It's like, I don't have to drink whiskey for that. It should be pleasure of finally understanding that. If this is really what a Jew is supposed to be doing, that's my goal of existence. Ultimately, I really want to know what I'm being made on. If you would live your lives around that piece of Ramban, the end of Parshas Boy, the ultimate goal would be the Tainug of Askola in Gan Eden, which is called Dveikus Ba'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Dveikus Ba'Kadosh Baruch Hu does not mean that God's going to sing around with a kumzitz, and you'll have Aaron Razael, and you'll dance Yismachu Malchutcha, or other things like a grasshopper. This will not be Saturday Night Fever, where we're all going to go around, flash dancing, No. It's going to be, we're going to just sit there and bask in the glory, in the pleasure of simply understanding. It's going to be so high, man. Like this is going to be the high of the high. Yeah, Lord, get me high, get me higher. This is what this is, literally. It's like unbelievable. Just the thought of it, Judge Mika. The only muscle I have is when I finally crack a sugya after breaking my back for 2 weeks. Okay? But if you ever were Amol B'Torah to the extent that you break your back, you don't sleep well at night because you're crazy. You wake up 3 a.m. going back to that Rajba. Well, you should try it someday. One day you should do it. That's when you know that you finally became a B'Torah. Okay? Did I ever tell you the story? I got to tell this to you. Okay, this is so important. You're talking about Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim. It's only so important to see that this thing happens. I must have told this. It's actually printed finally in a book. Someone forwarded it for me. They printed it. I was learning with my Rebbe after my marriage. We used to learn night Seder. Okay, I came back from Kollel at 7. By 8:15, I was already in his house in Givat Mordechai. I lived like a 20-minute walk from Givat Mordechai. I used to live in the old Katamon. And I used to walk across the hill up to Givat Mordechai. And Reb Zisl lived there. Those were the days where it wasn't paved over there. For him to get to the yeshiva, that was a mud road. You know what I mean? And there was he didn't even have a telephone in his house. It was that's the way it was. And we were learning. I went to his house. We would learn, and I would leave roughly something like 1:45. That's when I would leave. It would be a nice seder, from 8:15 to 1:15. That's Epsa seder, Epis. You learn something. And with him, there was no such a concept of batola. There was no bathroom breaks or a cup of coffee. It was just you learned. Okay, did you ever do like 5 hours knackadik with no Epsa? Okay, that's what what I did with him. And okay, and I was so happy because we were learning the first taisvis, of the 9th parak of Erevin. It's a shtickle bush to say, but I stumped him. I stumped him with a real. I really messed it up for him. I hate to say it, even though I was already a married person, it felt good to stump a guy like that. At the end of the day, hey, he walked out. We don't with this taisvis. I made it terrible for him. And I walked back. I'm going to say honestly, sometimes it's the bush. I think it was childish here, but I walked away whistling, man. Okay, good boy. By the time I got home, it was already like 1:20. I get a phone call. Randall, it's okay. You can sleep. Says, who's this? It was Rabbi Braden. He had walked from his house through the mud road to his office. Remember, he had a cataract, so he had to use a flashlight. Went to find a telephone to call me to say he has pshat and taisvis so I can sleep at night. To our nochas, he was sure I was not going to sleep at night because of this terrible kasha. When I actually walked out whistling, you understand? That's number one. He so much wanted I should be able to relax. He said, listen, I have pshat. So I said, Nusa, tell me. No. Now you're going to sleep. We'll do it tomorrow. I just want to make sure you can be able to sleep at night. You understand? By him, it was a milsa de pshita. There's no way a guy can fall asleep at night if you're stumped in the taisvus. And he was doing a chesed with me, walked all the way from his house, you know what this is, to that office over there in the mud with his flashlight, to call me to say, Mendel, you can go to sleep, there's a terrace. Okay, we'll learn it tomorrow. That's learning. And this is not art scroll. This is my boss. Okay? That's important to know. Okay, now you're talking about before Matan Torah, you have to have a tzur what Torah looks like. That's Heis Meland. You understand? So for him, the biggest Yisurim was a kasher, Meken Shlafen Banacht. And the biggest Tainig is Havana V'Asaga. And that's what we're doing. Now, to get a clay of Havana V'Asaga, God has to bring more godliness into our existence. God decided that you're going to get Havana V'Asaga on your, if he just gives you the capabilities, you didn't get anything. You have to earn it. So he makes life terribly miserable for you to, he throws hoops at you for you to learn how to jump and ultimately have the kalim in which you will finally be a barahachi to receive the Havana Vasaga. You're going to walk up there in Olam Ha'elyon and they want to give you great information, great understandings, and you never created skills. What's going to talk to you? It's like Kivek is going to come say Shin can be he won't get a job because no one has kalim for his shiur. It's very simple. So Kashbok is going to say a shiur there, Nachdusa Yisbarach, unless you worked all your life to create kalim for this, he's not going to waste time on you. So you're not going to get that. It's as simple as that. The best you're going to get is as much as you made kalim for yourself. You made kalim, you'll have. You won't have kalim, you won't have. This is a mimer of the Balatanya on the Gemara of Asher Misha Balakan v'Talmudai b'Yadai. He says all the Talmud is mishalim. All the Talmud is mishalim for deep, profound ideas. Reb Chaim did us a favor by taught us some minimum tools of conceptualization, which allow us to walk away from the stories and the rules and see the ideas. But that's, you can really use that only if you know Shas and Shulchan Aruch and then really know what's right and what's wrong. He also is not the gospel. He's giving you a tool. Now you have to use it on your own. Okay? So the pshat is very simple. The whole Torah is a mashal. And what's it a mashal to? The Gemara says the Torah is a mashal akadmoini, mashal lekadmoina shel olam. Ultimately, the Chachma of Kadosh Baruch Hu found in Torah is a mashal to his essential identity. He who preceded creation equals, it's a kli to understand the Ein Sof. Mashal hakadmoini, mashal lekadmoina shel olam. The God prior to creation. Do you know what that means? The only way of developing skills and kalim to be typhus, what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to teach us in Olam Ha'emes, is Torah. And the more we learn Torah as a mashal towards a nimshal, ultimately we will have kalim when we go up there. That's what the Rebbe writes in Tanya, not in Tanya. This is in Torah Or, where the Rebbe Tanya writes that the pshat Asher Misha Balakan v'Talmuda b'Yoda. It's actually on the Maimorim of Purim when he writes this. Now, if I remember carefully, it's the in Torah Or in Maimorim on Purim. I think it's Divrei Matzlo Mordechai Yotzel Lifnei HaMelech. I can look it up, but that's what he writes. He writes that all learning in Torah is a mashal to ultimately to have kalim to understand what we call the nimshal. Who is the nimshal? The word echad is the unbelievable nimshal, and that's what we're working for. That's where he writes there, the Balatanya. Therefore, learning Torah not be'iyun, you're missing, not creating vessels for the nimshal. You have to have the whole scope, but unless you understand not just the law, but understand the thinking behind it, and ultimately develop a tool of looking that always for the thinking behind it, you're not going to have the mashal for the nimshal. That's where he discusses by Chava why it's very important to learn dafka nigla be'iyun, because there you can understand not just the existence of ideas, but you can even attach yourself to the essence of the ideas. He writes there mefurish. That's why Kabbalah or Hasidus do not teach us the essence, only teach us the existence and the Hagdoras. When you learn Noshim Nezikin, you can understand not just the Metzias, but the Mahus. So he said it's very important to know they have profound understanding of Torah within that concept, that material, which can allow you to understand the Mahus of things, not just the Metzias of things, not just the Hagdora, but the Svara. Okay, for example, because of that, Noshim Nezikin are probably, as far as that's concerned, a better tool than learning Kachim V'Tyrus. Because Kachim V'Tyrus, we have more Hagdoras and no more Svaras, known as the Mahus of a Korban Oilah. What's the Hagdora? That's what I need. Okay, Mashenkim, to come to Mitzvah Raya, I have to understand not just the Hagdora, I have to understand the Mahus. And the Mahus will create the Hagdora. So that's a very important Yisai. So this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. One of the tools that he gives us in order to do that is called bracha, tefillah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, you know what this is like? He wants to give you independence. And by doing that, you're actually giving something to him. And I'll explain. The Gemara says in Kedushin that if a lady, wants to be one of your Kaddish a lady, you have to give her something, a pruta. What happens if she gives it to you? Modern day, the double ring marriage, garnished. Ki yikach ish isha, v'lo yisilakach isha li. She shouldn't be taking herself to the man. She can't tell him, Harei ani mekudeshet lecha. No, it has to be, she has to say it to her and give to her the money. What happens if he's an Adam Chashuv, which doesn't usually receive presents? And if you really want to give her a present, you would have to pay some macher, extra money, to convince him to receive your presents. If that's the case, when she gives him the present, she gives a $100 present to this Adam Chashuv, and he receives it, he's actually given her the value of the money she would have had to spend regularly to convince him to take. The macher would take 10%, so the $1,000 becomes $1,100. That $100, the makabel is actually giving to the noisen by receiving it. So the getter of our avodah and our tefillah and our limud is begetter matnas adam chashuv. HaKadosh Baruch Hu receives it, and by his receiving, he's giving to us. He's giving us stature. We give to him, and by him receiving from us, he is giving us stature. So this is an interesting idea of we're a noisen, which ultimately are a makabel. We have to give to him. That's what God wants. You must give to me. Why? Not that God needs it for himself. He needs to receive for you to receive by his receiving. The fact that we have a reciprocal relationship that he's willing to receive from us, so to speak, to be enhanced because of us, he's given the capability of his anhaga in our hands, and he said, you guys activate me. What does that do? He's giving you the kli of giving him and pushing him into a certain mode of behavior. By him agreeing to move according to you, he's giving you stature. So his Kabbalah is also his Nesina. The ultimate giving of God is giving the capability of the greatest capability of giving, of receiving, is receiving that you actually are the Manigas Oilamos. And that's called Tzelem Elokim. As Reb Chaim Volozhner elaborates, that Tzelem Elokim means, Elokim comes from the word Baal HaKochot Kulam. El means Koach. Elohim, the Gemara writes in Yeridea, it means Hashgacha Klalis. El is Hashgacha Pratis. El, one koyach. Elo, he means multitude of koyches. Equals, he has so many different koyches to so many different people and so many realities. The God of creation is multicolored. That's called Elohim, okay? It means he's the law, he's the sror, he's bala koyches of everything, okay? This is what it means. So when we say that's a grow in your day in the siman on Shemus Shein and Mechokim. There's a beautiful grow, which before you daven, you should learn that to understand what these different kinuyim of a Kadosh Baruch Hu are. What does Yushit Shaddai mean? What does Kel mean? What is different names of God? It's like a bit awkward to daven and call God by names unless you know what you're describing him. Like, is it nice what you're saying to him? You don't even know. You know, I mean, you wouldn't dare talk to a bus of a dam and describe him without knowing what the words you're saying. I mean, yet we have no problem of talking to God and not knowing what we're talking about. Sometimes it's frightening how people have it in them to do this, but that's the way it is. So Mamela, we have to understand, God gave you, your Tzelem Elokim, just as God is Bala Koiches Kulam. What God do we know? I'm not talking at the mode of God in essence, he's infinite. But the God of creation is the God of all of creation, all the different energies, powers, colors, and shapes. The total mass of what we call existence. Now, when you're called Tzelem Elokim, because basically your neshama has the capability of pushing and moving all that. You're a mini Elokim. You're an Elohim, actually. You now have the power of moving, pushing all that. How? God is giving you the keys to him. You are now his boss. Now, why does God give himself? Why would Gulliver give himself to the Lilliputs? Because he wants to give he wants so much that the Lilliputs should have stature. And by you activating him, you're actually growing on yourself. His receiving, he wants you to have. So he created a relationship which he's led by you, which therefore gives you an enormous amount of stature. That stature, by you acting in a certain way and bringing God into the world through activating through Torah mitzvahs, is what gives you the vessel to ultimately be the ultimate recipient, and there already it's going to be a matana, not a matana sadam chashuv. You're going to get havana v'asaga. The more you pray for God awareness and do what it takes to bring God awareness to the world, you will ultimately be a vessel to receive the ultimate capabilities of God awareness and understanding what echad means finally when you go up there. This is basically the site of bracha. I want to read this in the Rabbeinu B'chaya that we have in front of us. So if you have the pages that Meir sent, it's in the second side. On the pasuk v'yachalta v'savata v'rachtas Hashem Elokecha lo'oz t'oshnasan lach. In the second paragraph, v'yesh l'cholit orer kan, one should think, great thing to do. Ki yesh b'pasuk ze pesach lavin soida brachot. This pasuk will teach us the secret of the teachings of what a bracha means. V'loti matzei b'chol ha'torah b'shum makom. We'll never find anywhere in the Torah shetzivah kadosh baruch hu shenevarech lishmo ki'im b'makom hazeh. He obviously holds the birchas Torah as d'Rabbanan. Umizeh amar David avarcha shemecha v'amar hodu l'Hashem baruch hu shemoy. Where does this all come from? It comes from this pasuk v'yachalta v'savoto v'rachta. V'alderech hapshat umar tchila. I will say originally. This is what the Rabbeinu B'chai writes. Since we speak about this so many times, one has to see this inside to have a kinyan in it. Ki habrachot einam tzarech gavai l'tzarech edyot. At the end of the day, God does not need your bracha. You need it. Since He is the source of all bracha, and all the brachas come in a chain reaction from Him. Mishtal shel comes from the word chain. As we explained at length, that every giving in this world started with something much profounder and higher echelons of existence and came down like in a chain reaction down to this world. We look at it as a chain, one in the other. This is the lush of mishtal shalot. Imenu kol hanimtzaim hamvarchim oto ein kol barchatem kedaylo. All the brachas that they would give him are meaningless for him. Why? Ki hu hanimtza kadmon. He is the primary existent. He's the one that brought everything into existence. They have no existence outside of his existence. So how could it possibly give anything to him? If he's an absolute existent, everything is nothing but a relative existent, which is an expression of his absolute existence. How could they contribute to him in any fashion, form, or size? Obviously, his existence suffices for itself. Yes, if he's infinite, he's not dependent on anything. He would not need another for anything. Thus, what exactly are you enhancing in God by blessing Him? You can bless Him, as he writes, 24/7. He's perfect. You're nothing more than an expression of Him. What can you enhance? Who are you to enhance? A. B. What can you enhance? What can they give him, and what would he take from them? The only places where there's a to'elis of ribui, of enhancing, is only for us. We are not enhancing God, we are enhancing ourselves. When we pray, you pray, you're in a ma'ariv soon. Okay? You're not doing anything for God. You're enhancing yourself. Every person which makes a bracha on what he enjoys. Let's, for example, birchas hanen. But the same thing will be birchas hashvach. What are you doing? You're testifying that everything is from Him, and He decided there will be trees. He decides, I have an apple. This is because God created nature, and therefore there are apples, because He said so and He wanted to. He said, touch your heart's desha. It is He who created this food. Now, why would He create it? Because He wants the creatures to live. You must say a bracha chayna every so often, right? Burn the fashas rabbis v'chesrayin makom asher brasa lach v'em nefesh kochai. The Rashba elaborates on this. God created man and his deficiencies and the capability of fulfilling the gap of those deficiencies. He created you a creature which needs sustenance, and He's created the capability of having sustenance. Okay, that's what you say, derech hagat. ובזכותם התבואה והפירות מתברכים ומתרבים, and because of God, that the peiros and the tefua are growing and multiplying. That's what you say when you're doing a bracha. You are quoting, you are the source of it all. You are the makor haribui. Ba'anene eino mevorach, a person who takes without saying a bracha, goizel mimenu hashgacha. It's a very important statement. He steals the hashgacha from God. Umoiser anhagis ashvein lekechavu mazolos. What does that mean? That's a frightening statement. Is it true? Is that what really happens? Or is that what's in your head? The Gemara doesn't say, Choshev shu gazlan, says he is a gazlan. Means you are taking away the anhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean? So Rabbeinu B'chai writes, yes, you are literally taking away the hashgacha and giving it to the kechavim mazalos. Was meint das? What does it mean? How do we understand this idea? A little further. Knesses Yisrael is a kinui for what we call Shechina. Means the shirish of Klal Yisrael. Shene'emar goizel aviv ve'imai. That's Zachar and Nekeva. Kutche bricha and Shchinte. We discussed this at one time. I'm not going to elaborate here at this stage. Claim it goizel lakadosh baruch hu hashgacha v'knesses Yisrael ha'peiros. Why? She'ba'avain zeh ha'peiros mismatan Yisrael b'sibasai. If you basically are not mocked that everything comes from Kadosh Baruch Hu, you're taking away hashgacha, and therefore you're a might peiros from Klal Yisrael. Shoykala olam nida in kulei acherubai, because yachad v'yachad nidan acherubai. What's he saying here? He's saying something which is a very important havana. The hashgacha of Kadosh Baruch Hu is only on because you recognize him. Should you not recognize God and actually believe that things are b'mikra, then they will be b'mikra. God will only interact personally with people who recognizes that. That's Shitas Ramban, Rabbeinu B'chai, V'Reva, Rishonim. If you don't believe in hashgacha, you will not have hashgacha pratis to that extent. You'll have accountability. Yeah, you'll get schar, you get einish, but he will not lead your life. Lashon of the Ramban is Rishaim nitanim lemikre. Yes, Rishoim are left to the haphazard realities. The more that you are davik by Kadosh Baruch Hu with Havana and Hakara, the more you actually bring hashgacha into this world. And since Klal Yisrael depends on all of Klal Yisrael, we need more and more people to live lives of intelligence, of literally realizing, thinking, believing, seeing, and feeling that it's really up to God. That all the laws of science and nature are nothing more than expressions of Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The more you live, walk, and talk that, then you really do have a unique hashgacha. I once taught the famous Gemara in Tainus, where the Gemara says that Reb Chanina ben Daisa, he had no problems. Once he was very poor, and once there was no oil in the house, and his daughter tells him, listen, we have to light candles for Shabbos. What are you going to do? So she says, what's in the house? So she says, vinegar. So light the vinegar. She says, what do you mean? Vinegar is not a fuel. She says, what are you talking about? Misha Amar Lashem and the Adlik. Hu Yomer Lachem it's Viadlik. Oil isn't a fuel, it's Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now it'll be Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Chaimitz. And it happened. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even Teva is not a Metzias if you really believe it's not a Metzias. The Hashgacha is Tali Koloi in Hakara. Forget, the Gemara says a story that Rava once prayed, drove the world very crazy. There should be Geshem, rain, when there was really not the season. And the Gemara says that his father came to him in a dream and says, you mamish, you endangered your life because you're matriach HaKadosh Baruch Hu to change nature. Atrucha lemore. How could you dare ask God for a miracle? And we don't have a time like that on Chanina ben Daisa. Because obviously Chanina ben Daisa lived that world of Misha Amar L'Shem L'Yadlik, Yom L'Chem T'Yadlik. He really lived that way. That's really beyond comprehension. A person can live that, but he actually lived that way. Walked, talked, ate, and slept that echad. He lived there, what we hope to get up there. Well, then for him, there is no teva. It's kula yad Hashem. There's no gvulos. Rava, not bad man, okay, was not there. And for him, this really was a miracle. It was against the laws of nature, and this is asking God to change the rules. What are you bothering him to change the rules? I have rules set. But Chanina Daisa doesn't have that problem. For him, there's no such thing as a rule. It's Ratzon Hashem 24/7. That's all it is. Rava still lived the way we normally live. No, there's rules of science which were created by God. His echad was a quality different than the echad of Chanina ben Daisa. Each one created different kalim to understand what echad meant. Ultimately, they had different mashalim, which they will ultimately understood the mashal akadmaini in their time. So this is what we say here, that hashgacha depends on your hakara. Hashgacha really depends on how much you're makir in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why I started this whole series with trying to give a taste. What are you asking for? You know why? Because the more you understand, the profounder kli you will have. The more you understand what you're asking for, you understand that is B'Shayrish Elyon, that's tefillah. Tefillah totally depends on the amount you mamish understand what you're asking for. And that's what the Rashi writes by Adam Arish. You need Adam Arish to be makir b'tevasan shel kshamim. You have to chap what this comes from, and then mevakesh aleim. And that's why, because God wants us to have that nimshol, that mashal. He wants us to learn his ratzon in this world to have that mashal. Why? Because he wants ultimately for us to be zeicha, to understand the ultimate toiv hagomer. And this is what this says over here. Now, there's an interesting thing he continues and writes, which is a very interesting thing. Okay, I have to stop now because I know you have Myriv. Do me a favor, read the, maybe we can do this, I don't know when, a very interesting Ramban, where the Ramban equates, this is a very interesting Ramban, it's found in your pages over here in Ramban Vayikra Chav Pasuk Gimel, with an extension I can add, it's not found in the pages, so you can write it down, Vayikra Yud Ches Pasuk Chav Aleph. He equates a Neneble Bracha like a Mavir Zaroi Lamoilech. Now, you must read the Ramban to see the equation between Mavir Zaroi Lamoilech, which is a pretty hideous activity, okay? Comparing that to Nene Moila Mazeble Bracha, and understand how important it is for us to daven and to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu M'toich HaKorah. Read that Ramban and see it yourself. Hopefully, maybe I'll be able to stick it in sometime before Shavuos. Okay, have a good night. Bracha v'atzlacha. Take care. See you tomorrow. I'll send you a Ma'amar Kaimis. I really want to start the following sugya. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.